Hi, thank you for joining me once again. Imagine you are part of a football team, but you seldom study the playbook and you rarely go to practice. Well, you're not going to be really developing yourself much as a player, but you're also going to be bringing the team down. One of my favorite images for the church is that of a team. With Christ as our head, we form a team. We form something that is bigger than ourselves. We form something that is greater than ourselves. The Epistle to the Hebrews says, we should not stay away from our assembly, as is the custom of some, but encourage one another. So by attending Mass, we encourage one another simply by our presence. Even if you walk into Mass and you don't say a word to anyone, and you walk out and you don't say a word to anyone, you still said a lot. You said, this is something important. This is something valuable. And as Catholics, we take seriously the obligation to attend Mass every Sunday and Holy Day when we can reasonably do so. Since March of last year, due to the pandemic, Bishop Johnston has lifted that obligation. Now, that obligation is going to resume the weekend of June 5th and 6th, which is very appropriately the feast of the body and blood of Christ, a day when, in a very special way, we reflect on the great gift of the Eucharist. And it's time for us to revisit that whole idea of obligation. This is something that remains very important to the life of the Church, but it should be more than just checking off a box. It's a way we support our brothers and sisters. It's a way we help to build up the team. And sometimes people say, well, I only go out of obligation. Well, there's nothing wrong with doing things out of a sense of obligation. Okay? Obviously, it's not ideal, right? But it's not bad. Sometimes we get up and go to work simply out of a sense of obligation. There are other important duties in life that some days we might be really enthusiastic about carrying out, other days we're not. And that's when we need the obligation. We need the obligation to support us and to strengthen us when we don't feel like doing things. The whole idea of an obligation in life is to help us to do the right thing, whatever it is, not only when we feel like doing it, but more importantly, even when we don't feel like doing it. Even if we don't feel like doing it, we still say, this is the right thing. This is what we need to do. And at the same time, I think taking things to a much deeper level, if we could really understand what happens at Mass, what happens with the Eucharist, there would be a lot less need to talk about a Sunday obligation. At each Mass, Jesus makes a gift to himself, to us, under the form of bread and wine. After each worthy communion, we can say with St. Paul, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And I would add, we could also say, it is no longer we who live, but Christ who lives in us. So this is something that's very important to the life of the Church, and it's an obligation we should take seriously. Sometimes people say, well, I felt really bad because I was very sick and I couldn't make it to Mass. And if I watch Mass on TV, does that fulfill my obligation? Well, no, it doesn't fulfill your obligation because you have no obligation at that point. If you're sick and you watch Mass on television, that's a very worthy act. I would encourage you to do that. But our obligation involves what we can do. It does not involve what we can't do. So if you're very sick, if you have a temperature of 104 or something, well, you shouldn't be coming to Mass because you don't want to make other people sick, all right? But also, it's not really possible for you to attend Mass at that point. So at that point, you have no obligation. We're obliged to do what we can do. We're not obliged to do what we can't. Well, how do we differentiate all this? If I have a temperature of 99.9, I don't have to go. If I have a temperature of 99.8, I do. Well, there's no way you can legislate all that. What I encourage people to do is simply be honest with yourself. be honest with yourself. And if you know you are really sick, you're going to know you shouldn't go to Mass that weekend. If you have a high temperature, again, you're going to know that, all right? If your elbow is a little bit creaky, well, you're going to know you should still go to Mass. So probably the most important thing with that is for people to be honest with themselves. Now, some of you have seen this before. This is my jar of marbles. I have a jar of marbles here, and there's 168 marbles here. There's one for every hour of the week. And I tell people, this marble would be the Sunday celebration of the Eucharist, unless I talk too long, which doesn't happen very often. Every now and then maybe, but not too often. And all of this, okay, is the rest of the week. So our Sunday obligation is 1/168th of each week. There's still 167 hours over here. So remember, we form part of a team. We form part of a team that we call the church, and as we share in the Eucharist, we not only receive the body of Christ, we also build up the body of Christ in one another as we form this team that we call God's church. Thank you, and God bless you all.